In a law office on a Tuesday afternoon, a family sits across from an attorney to hear what their uncle left behind. A man who wore the same brown coat through 3 decades of winters, drove a rust-spotted pickup nobody wanted to be seen borrowing, and never once picked up a check at a family dinner. They expect a number with 5 digits. The attorney reads one with 7. 3 blocks away, in a different office that same week, another family hears the opposite story. Their father had the boat, the watch collection, the country club membership everyone envied, and what he actually left behind, once the loans were called in, was a stack of bills taller than the inheritance. Here is the part that should unsettle you. Statistically, you have already sat within a few feet of someone like that first uncle sometime in the last week, at a diner counter, in a waiting room, behind you in a checkout line. And you never once suspected it, because he made absolutely sure you would not. Money, it turns out, does not speak the language you were trained to listen for. It does not shout from a windshield or flash off a wrist. It moves in silence, on purpose, and the people who actually have it have spent years making sure the rest of us keep reading the wrong signals entirely. What you are about to see are the 10 signals that do not lie, the ones that survive contact with a real bank statement instead of a highlight reel. Learn them, and you will never sit across from a stranger or an uncle the same way again. If you're new here, I'm Megan Carter, and this channel exists for one reason: to take the money conversations nobody has out loud, the ones about what actually separates rich from just looking rich, and lay them out plainly, with real numbers, real habits, and zero fluff. Everything in this list is pulled from real financial research and real data most people never bother to read, translated into something you can actually use the next time you're sizing up a purchase, a person, or your own bank statement. Here's what I'd ask before we get into it. Somewhere in the world right now, you're watching this from a very specific place, a specific city, on a specific device, at a specific hour of your day. And I'd genuinely like to know where that is. Drop your city and country in the comments below. I read every single one, and there's something strangely grounding about picturing this video landing in a living room in Manila and a kitchen in Toronto in the same afternoon. It reminds me this isn't just a video. It's a conversation happening across a few hundred time zones at once. If any of the 10 signs coming up hit a little too close to home, in either direction, tap the like button so more people trying to tell real wealth, apart from performed wealth, actually see this. And if you want the next breakdown, the moment it drops, the subscribe button is sitting right there, and it costs nothing but a tap. One more thing before we start. None of what follows requires a 6-figure salary or a lucky break. It requires recognizing a pattern. So let's get into exactly what that pattern looks like, starting with the vehicle parked in the driveway. By 2026, the average new car in America costs north of $50,000, and the average monthly payment has settled in around $770. More than 1 in 5 buyers now sign for payments above $1,000 a month, and a growing share are stretching those loans past 7 years just to make the math survive. None of that describes a wealthy person. It describes someone renting the appearance of one, at interest. The genuinely rich run the opposite math entirely. Decades of research into real millionaires keeps landing on the same figure. The typical one spends only around 1% of their net worth on the car in the driveway. On a $2 million net worth, that is a $20,000 vehicle, usually bought a few years used, usually kept for a decade or longer. Frank spent 31 years welding pipe for the same company before he retired. He still drives the truck he bought in 2011, dent in the tailgate included, and he has never once considered trading it in. His investment account, built one automatic paycheck deduction at a time, crossed 7 figures 4 years ago. Ask him why he doesn't upgrade, and he'll tell you the truck still starts every morning, so the question doesn't compute. That dent isn't a sign of struggle. It's the receipt of 31 years of a decision nobody around him ever noticed. Drive through the neighborhoods everyone associates with money, the gated ones, the ones with lawns that look vacuumed. And you'll find an uncomfortable number of families one missed paycheck from disaster, buried under a mortgage sized to what a lender approved rather than what made sense. The genuinely wealthy tend to do the mathematical opposite, buy well under the ceiling, then let the difference compound for 30 years instead of financing a bigger kitchen. It's not only a billionaire habit. One of the most famous investors alive still lives in the same modest Omaha house he purchased in 1958, despite being able to buy nearly any property on the planet. The same instinct shows up at every income level. The retired teacher who quietly reaches 7 figures almost never did it from a mansion. She did it from a 3-bedroom house with a paid-off roof and a fully funded brokerage account underneath it. Every extra bedroom is more tax, more insurance, more square footage that costs money to heat and means nothing to your future. A bigger house feels like proof you made it. For most people, it quietly becomes the anchor that keeps them from ever getting free. The genuinely wealthy have largely stopped using their bodies as a billboard. The logos disappear. The watch, if there's one at all, is the kind you'd never look twice at. What replaces the branding is plain, well-made basics, worn until they actually wear out and not a day sooner. Compare that to how status spending actually behaves in the real world. The louder the branding, the more likely you're looking at someone trying to convince a room of something they haven't fully secured yet. There's research showing the biggest luxury spenders are frequently not the wealthy at all. They're upper-middle earners performing a role, while the people who could buy anything have simply stopped needing anyone to know it. Wealth managers have a name for this now: stealth wealth. Diane runs 3 dental practices and has for 11 years. She wears the same 3 sweaters in rotation, drives to every meeting in flat shoes, and has been mistaken for a hygienist more times than she can count. She has never corrected anyone. The blankness isn't an accident, it's the tell. At almost every gathering, someone narrates their own spending. What the renovation cost, what the bonus came in at, what the trip ran them. The genuinely wealthy are consistently the one person in the room who says nothing at all, and the silence isn't shyness. Talking about money invites comparison, requests, and resentment, and people sitting on real assets have learned there's no version of that conversation that benefits them. The deeper reason is even simpler. For them, money stopped being exciting a long time ago. It became infrastructure, the boring system humming quietly under everything else, and nobody throws a party because the plumbing worked today. Ray ran a small auto shop for 28 years before selling it. Ask him what he does now, and you get one word: retired. What he doesn't mention is that he still owns the building his old shop sits in, and the rent check that lands every month is larger than most of his neighbors' salaries. He drives the cheapest truck on the lot and lets every dinner conversation about money pass him by without ever showing his hand. This is the sign underneath all the others. In 2026, the system allows a person to put $24,500 into a 401k, another $7,500 into an IRA, and, for those on a high-deductible health plan, up to $4,400 into a health savings account as an individual. Add a typical employer match, and the combined ceiling on tax-advantaged saving climbs past $70,000 a year. Almost nobody hits it. The genuinely rich treat it as a target, not a suggestion, and once they've filled it, they keep going into an ordinary taxable brokerage account, buying the same boring index funds month after month. None of it requires willpower, because none of it is a choice made twice. The money leaves the paycheck before it's ever visible, so it's never missed and never spent on something shinier. Teresa has worked the same hospital floor for 16 years. She brings coffee from home and drives a sedan her sister handed down. Her coworkers assume she's just careful with a tight budget. What they don't see is a brokerage statement that would stop the whole break room cold, built from a single design choice, repeated on autopilot for 16 straight years. Americans currently carry more than $1.2 trillion in credit card debt at an average interest rate hovering around 22%. Roughly 6 in 10 cardholders carry a balance month to month, which means a balance left sitting untouched roughly doubles in cost in a little over 3 years. Buy something for $1,000, ignore the statement, and you eventually pay for two of them. The genuinely wealthy live on the far side of that math. They use credit cards constantly, often for thousands of dollars a month, chasing the points and the cashback. And then they clear the balance in full, before a single cent of interest attaches. Car loans barely exist in their world because the modest car was bought in cash years ago. Cheap debt gets tolerated when it's working in their favor, like a mortgage locked at a low fixed rate decades ago. Expensive debt gets eliminated on sight. What's left is someone who owns nothing flashy and owes nothing to anyone, which turns out to be one of the most underrated forms of freedom there is. If any of this is landing, take 1 second right now and hit subscribe. This channel breaks down exactly how real wealth actually gets built, every single week, with no hype attached. Now, back to the list. Watch how a person reacts the moment something breaks, because financial pressure is a kind of truth serum. A transmission fails on a Monday. A pipe bursts overnight. A job disappears without warning. For most households living close to the edge, with the national savings rate stuck near 4% of income, any one of those becomes an instant crisis. The genuinely wealthy absorb the exact same bad news with an almost unsettling calm, and it isn't temperament. It's a real emergency fund, kept in a high-yield account, earning close to 4%, instead of the account most people never think to check. The gap is enormous. $20,000 sitting in a competitive high-yield account earns roughly $800 a year. The same $20,000 at a typical big bank rate earns something closer to $2, barely enough for a sandwich. Two people can hold the identical balance and end the year in two completely different financial universes, simply because one of them knew where to park it. There's a pattern in how wealthy people shop that looks, on the surface, like spending more. They pay a real price up front for the well-made boots, the solid table, the appliance that isn't the cheapest option on the shelf. And then they keep that item for 10 or 15 years, while everyone chasing the look churns through 3 cheap replacements in the same window and spends more in total to end up with less. Elena bought one well-made leather bag 14 years ago and still carries it daily. The corners are worn soft, and a stranger might assume she can't afford a new one. In reality, she's spent less on bags across 14 years than a coworker spends in 2, because that coworker replaces hers every season. When something breaks, Elena's first instinct is to repair it. A $60 fix beats an $800 replacement almost every time. It reads as frugality from the outside. It's actually a much more sophisticated math than most people ever run. Pay attention to who can decline something without a flicker of guilt. The genuinely wealthy are remarkably comfortable skipping the destination bachelor party, the group dinner that doesn't fit the week, the upgrade everyone else is buying purely because everyone else is buying it, and they do it without a long apology attached. From the outside, this reads as someone who can't afford to join in. The truth runs the opposite direction. They can afford almost any of it, precisely because they've spent years saying no to what doesn't actually matter to them. Marcus got a substantial raise 3 years ago and changed essentially nothing about how he lives. Same apartment, same car, same weekly routine, while the entire raise now flows straight into investments before he ever sees it land. To friends who upgraded their lifestyle the moment their income rose, Marcus looks almost stubbornly cheap. What they're missing is that he spends generously, without hesitation, on the 2 or 3 things he genuinely cares about, and goes completely silent on everything else. Here's the sign that quietly ties every other one together. At some point, the genuinely wealthy simply stop performing wealth because the performance was always a stand-in for the real thing, and they no longer need a stand-in. All the energy other people spend looking successful gets redirected into things that don't photograph at all. Time, flexibility, the ability to walk away from a bad deal or a toxic job, the capacity to help a struggling parent without a second thought, or take an ordinary Tuesday off without asking anyone's permission. That's what real wealth actually buys. Not a louder car, not a heavier watch. The slow, unglamorous freedom to live entirely on your own terms, and the strange, quiet confidence that comes with never again needing to prove it to a room full of strangers. They're not broke, and they didn't lose. They're simply finished trying to convince anybody of anything.